start off with Brock Purdy, who's got a great matchup against the Cardinals. He hasn't been good this year. He's had one good game, but Arizona's given up 19 points per game to quarterbacks. Purdy, the fantasy stats aren't there. He's first in completion percentage over expected. He's third in expected points added. And so I think he's a top 10 player this week. And then I'm going to go with Justin Fields against my beloved Dallas Cowboys. Why? No Micah, no Lawrence, and Cowboys can't stop the run, although they did last week to a degree against Devin Singletary. But Justin Fields is what? A mobile quarterback who can run with the football. And he had almost 32 points last week. So he is in my top 10. I would start Justin Fields over Dak Prescott. And you'll hear about that in a second.
Who are we sitting at quarterback?
Patrick Mahomes. And maybe I will reverse jinx him back into life, folks, because I traded him in the 2 leagues where I had him. So I have no Mahomes anymore, and I'm very happy about it. 14.4 points per game is what he's averaging this year. Like, he was bad in the second half last year, too. He's got no Rashee Rice, and the Saints have allowed the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks this year.
10.
So Patrick Mahomes is not a great play. No. And then Dak is not a great play. Dak's had one good game this year. He's had one. It was that game that they had to come back against Baltimore and ended up getting beat. Even against the Giants, he was kind of mid. It was kind of meh. Now you got Pittsburgh at the big ketchup bottle. They're giving up an average of fewer than 14 points per game at home to quarterbacks dating back to last year. They also got beat up last week, and I think they're going to be a little bit pissed off about it. Nationally televised game. I don't think Dak Prescott's going to put up a big stat line.
Let's get to those running backs that I alluded to. It's a tough week at that one. Who are we starting?
Yeah, and I mean, this is more validation than anything else, but I mean, Josh Jacobs has got a great matchup, and I get it. He hasn't been good this year. He's averaging fewer than 11 points per game, but this is where we're at. Like I've told, Lindsay and everybody out there, there's really not a lot of must-start players anymore. But the Rams have allowed 4 running backs to beat them for more than 16 points this year, and DeAndre Swift, who was garbage going into last week, scored almost 30. So Jacobs should remain in starting lineups, and so should Chuba Hubbard. He's been a stardom for me for the last couple of weeks. He's scoring at a very high rate, over 22 fantasy points per game in those last 2 games. He's 5th among running backs in rushing yards over expected, and the Bears have allowed 3 running backs to beat them for over 18 points this year. So Chuba Hubbard continues to be a nice play.
Who are we sitting?
So sitting may be a little harsh. I mean, this is kind of temper your expectations because you've got 4 teams off and injuries, but James Conner, who's been really good. Listen, I mean, I have no problem with him, but the matchup is not great against the Niners. He has failed to score more than 11 points in 4 of 6 career games against San Francisco. And they've held Aaron Jones and Ramondre Stevenson to fewer than 10 points in games this year. So I would keep that in mind and temper your expectations with James Conner. And then I would not chase the points with Chase Brown against the Baltimore Ravens. Last week, he had a big game, over 23 fantasy points. They stink out loud against the run. Now he's got the Ravens. They've allowed running backs to average 2.7 yards per rush, and they've given up the 3rd fewest fantasy points to running backs. So while I would start Zach Moss, and I wouldn't love it, but I would start him, I would probably fade Chase Brown if I could.
Talk about wide receivers and some guys who have good matchups this week. Who are we starting?
And let's start with Garrett Wilson. We'll stick with the Jets. I mean, he's averaged 10.9 points per game. I mean, that's not good, right? I mean, he was drafted at the end of first round. Bad. But the Vikings have allowed the 4th most points to perimeter receivers. And so if Wilson doesn't step up this week, I would be really concerned about him because very soon he may be playing with Devontae Adams. And then Brian Thomas Jr. as LSU continues to pump out these like awesome NFL wide receivers. He's averaging 14.5 points in his first 4 games as a pro. He had almost 22 last week. Now he's got the Colts. Over their first 4 games, Lindsay, their defense has already allowed 5 wide receivers to beat them for 15 points, including 2 who have gone over 20. So I like Brian Thomas this week.
Well, who do we not like this week that we otherwise would?
I hate this. Tyreek Hill. I've had Jalen Waddle as a sit the last 2 weeks. He's done nothing the last 2 weeks, but neither is Tyreek Hill. In his last 2 games, 12 targets, and he has scored 15.2 points, not per game, combined. And the Dolphins just don't have a quarterback who can get Hill the ball downfield, and it's killing them. And so like this week, I have Tyreek Hill in my NFFC league. I think I got to play Rashid Shaheed ahead of him, and I hate it. Tyreek Hill's done nothing. And, it's a road game against New England, so like Tyreek Hill he's a hard sell for me right now, and it's not anything to do with him. And then Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's move to Chicago has been brutal from a fantasy respect. He has scored 11.8 points in his first 2 games combined. And now the Panthers defense, like, it's not awful. They're giving up just 8.6 points per game to slot receivers. That's where Allen's run about 53% of his routes so far. I mean, if you're desperate, I get it, but right now Keenan Allen's more name and less stats.
All right, let's talk tight ends.
2 guys playing in the same game in what will be a glorious uniform matchup, by the way. My beloved Dallas Cowboys and Jake Ferguson, 11 plus points in each of his last 2 games and 3 of 4 this season. Of course, remember, he missed a game due to injury. The matchup is not great because the Steelers are actually tough on tight ends, but they haven't really played a fantasy relevant tight end beyond Kyle Pitts, and I use that term loosely.
Yeah,
and Kyle Pitts beat them for 11.6. That was back in week 1. So Ferguson, tight ends. I mean, dare I say that Ferguson is kind of a must start.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth. He's coming off his best game. He had almost 17 points against the Colts. He's averaging just under 10 points per game. And for a tight end, that's good. And his targets have actually gone up in 3 straight weeks. So while the Cowboys have been tough against tight ends, I don't care because Freiermuth is getting more opportunities in an offense that's going to score points. I'm going to start him against my beloveds.
Lots and lots of ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about PrizePicks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 stat projections, and you watch the winnings come rolling in.
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. And now you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And PrizePicks invented what's called the flex play. And that means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't absolutely perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit.
Jen Piacenti's lineups were perfect last weekend. She won a bunch of money on PrizePicks. We shared a screenshot of that on the social media channels that we have here, Fantasy Dirt Pod. Let's see, Saquon more than 22.5 receiving yards, that cashed. Baker more than 1.5 touchdowns. Godwin more than 65.5 receiving yards. How about Brian Thomas Jr.? She hit on that also, more than 47.5 receiving yards. Anyway, she's going to be here Wednesday and Friday and can point us in the right direction of a few of those types of player projections that you might want to get in on this week.
All right, folks. So make sure you download the PrizePicks app today, and you could use the code FANTASYDIRT and get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus, guys. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game.
Who are we sitting?
I have got you sitting Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, and Tyreek Hill and Mark Andrews. What bizarro world are we living in, Lindsay Rhodes? It's crazy. But I mean, think about this. He has scored fewer than 4 points in 3 of 4 games. He's had 2 games where he has scored nothing. This is Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
His offensive snaps are down. His targets are like non-existent. This is 4 weeks into the season. I mean, this is kind of becoming a trend. And again, I am hoping that I am reverse jinxing him back to life by saying to sit him, but I don't know how the hell you play Mark Andrews right now. If you put his stats along with anybody else's name, they're not even on a fantasy roster. And then Dalton Schultz. Now, Dalton Schultz, believe this, Lindsay, or not, he leads all tight ends in snaps played, but he's not getting any targets. He's 17th in targets among tight ends. He's averaging fewer than 5 points per game, and the Bills have allowed just 1 tight end to beat them for more than 8 points in their first 4 games. So this is like one of those situations where, like, even though he's on the field and he's running routes, the targets aren't there. I'm not playing him.